Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome Priya Talreja. Priya is an environmental policy researcher from the California. She's supported by Fulbright Portugal and the National Geographic, hosted by CEPLA in the University of the Azores, and she currently researching how electric vehicle infrastructure can better support the growing tourism in the Azores. And that is exactly what she's here to talk about. Priya, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daniela, and thank you for having me.
Okay, you can start to share your presentation.
Okay,
The stage is yours.
thank you. So, my project is about electric vehicle infrastructure to support tourism mobility in the Azores. And just to give a brief background about myself, I'm originally from Northern California, and I took my bachelor's in environmental policy, analysis, and planning at the University of California, Davis. And after graduating, I worked on electric vehicle charging incentive programs, first in California and then in New York. And the two programs that I worked on were the Communities in Charge program in the California and by the California Energy Commission and Charge Ready New York 2.0, that was funded by the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And then I got a research grant to come and conduct my own research investigation here in the Azores, and this was jointly funded by the National Geographic Society and Fulbright Portugal with support from the Azores Regional Government. And I was hosted by the Center of Applied Economic Studies of the Atlantic at the University of the Azores, and this project was developed in collaboration with the Regional Directorate of Energy and the local utility EDA. So my research question was, how can we use geographic information systems, or GIS, to inform where electric vehicle chargers should be built? And this is considering the mobility needs of residents, tourists, and local industries in the Azores. So, just a brief overview and some context that we estimate that there are about 3,000 electric vehicles in San Miguel Island. And so, in order for the region to achieve its electric vehicle adoption goals, public charging infrastructure must meet the differing mobility needs of the core users. So, I was looking at residents, tourists, and industry. And for residents, we know that approximately 47% of households in Ponte Delgada, they don't have access to a garage or a parking space. And so those households will rely on public charging infrastructure if they have an electric vehicle. And this data comes from the most recent census that was taken in 2021. And tourists, of course, tourists renting vehicles, they depend heavily on reliable and visible public charging infrastructure across the island, because normally the accommodations may not have a place to charge. Some of them definitely do, but not all of them have a place for them to charge their car. And then lastly, industry. So I was looking specifically at rental car companies and rideshare services like Bolt and Uber because they definitely require charging access to support their fleet and operations. So just a bit of background about what GIS is, or what is a geographic information system. A geographic information system is a technology that's used to create, manage, analyze, and map different types of data. So and in a GIS, you link data to locations. So you're combining spatial information of like where things are with descriptive details of what those things are like. And so by doing this, GIS will help you understand patterns, relationships, and geographic context. So GIS is present in many different applications that we use every day, and any application that collects or analyzes or uses location data is using GIS. For example, Google Maps, AllTrails, or even Instagram uses GIS for its location tags feature. And instead of one single map, a GIS is made up of multiple layers of information, and each layer represents a different type of data. Like you can have roads, rivers, buildings, elevation, population, and then when you stack all of these layers on top of each other, each one adds new information, and when you combine them, they create a more complete and detailed picture of a place. And GIS allows us to analyze the relationships between all of these data layers. So, for my research approach, when I was considering electric vehicle charger site selection, I knew that this requires multiple layers of data. You need to consider technical feasibility, community need, and also stakeholder input. And so mapping using tools like GIS allows us to understand the relationships between these data layers and evaluate potential sites for EV chargers within the context of the surrounding infrastructure and the demographics of the parish that you might place the EV charger in. And so moving forward, I'll refer to sites for EV chargers as candidate sites. And my goal for my research while I was here is to develop a map-based approach for identifying priority locations for EV chargers. And my study area was the municipality of Ponta Delgada. So the first step is to identify the feasible locations. So I consulted with my project partner, the Regional Directorate of Energy, and one important feasibility criteria that we identified was EU funding eligibility. And so the Azores 2030 program is funded by European funds from 2021 to 2027. And so in order to qualify for this EU funding, any of the chargers installed must be installed in public parking lots. So I initially started with a data set of the public parking lots that are managed by the municipality of Ponta Delgada. And so that represents the initial universe of potential EV charger locations. Then you need to consider the grid hosting capacity. So I consulted with EDA to better understand the available data we have on secondary substations and overall local grid capacity. And I use EDA's 2025 low voltage grid characterization report, or CARE-BT, and I mapped those secondary substations in Ponta Delgada and their estimated areas of service. Then I calculated the estimated available electrical capacity for each of these substations and identified which of the potential candidate sites were located within the service areas of these substations. So then the candidate sites were assigned a grid feasibility score based on the number and the type of chargers that the local grid could support. The next step was to identify high need areas. So I was looking at factors like existing charging coverage, like from MOBA, and also the 2021 census data for each parish. I created a need-based composite score, and my objective was to identify candidate sites where building chargers would provide the greatest community benefit by addressing the existing gaps in charging access. So for my need-based score, I used three indicators. First of all, residential charging need, namely the percentage of households in the parish where that do not have access to a garage or parking. Then I looked at existing charging coverage, so the distance of a potential site to the nearest public EV charger, and this was using the MOBA charger location data. Then I looked at public accessibility, so the distance from a potential site to the nearest public building, and I was using the public building data that was provided by the municipality of Ponta Delgada. So I calculated my need-based score for each site, and then the parking lots or candidate sites, they were grouped into priority categories based on their final score. Now, step three is the preliminary site selection. So this component in my project is ongoing, but site selection will consider both these need-based scores and these grid feasibility scores. And different policy goals will result in different site rankings, and implementation may occur in multiple phases to target different groups and depending on various factors like funding availability and regional or municipal priorities. So rather than producing one fixed answer of where you should build chargers, the map can evaluate different planning goals and then identify and rank the sites that best meet those priorities. And so candidate sites can be ranked based on things like the number of chargers planned, the charger type, geographic distribution, or target user needs, because different user groups also have different charging needs. For example, residents may depend more on overnight or medium speed charging that's located close to their residential corridors, while tourists and rideshare drivers require fast chargers near commercial areas and near central city and major travel corridors. So the next step of my project was to collect stakeholder input. And so I also wanted to note that rideshare services or TVDE in the Azores, like Bolt and Uber, are required to use electric vehicles. So they're a really significant driver of tourism mobility on the island. So they were definitely an important stakeholder to consider in this project. So first, I consulted with the president of the Association of TVD drivers in San Miguel, and he estimated there are around 37 active EV rideshare drivers as of this past May 2026. And he voiced that the drivers are experiencing major difficulties due to the limited number of fast chargers and the frequent charger service outages for the chargers that they already have. And slow chargers are underutilized by rideshare drivers. So this is important because the charger type and charger placement are important considerations for this group of stakeholders. I distributed a survey for rideshare drivers in San Miguel using the ArcGIS Survey 123 platform. And so 20 of those 31 drivers responded to my survey. And something really important to point out is that 89% of the drivers primarily use public fast chargers, and 61% of drivers do not have access to any private home charging. And so when these drivers, most of them charge daily or multiple times a day, and so it's important to consider where they might need charging infrastructure for their operations. So on the right side, you can see a map where drivers have submitted specific locations where they would benefit from having charging infrastructure. Then I consulted with rental car companies. So I conducted some interviews and surveys with the major local rental car companies. And these rental companies identified that there's insufficient charging infrastructure, and this is a major barrier for EV adoption for their tourists who are renting cars and also for their own fleet expansion. Because if people are not renting EVs, then it doesn't really make sense for the rental car company to expand its electric vehicles in its fleet. So, all of the surveyed companies reported that tourists experience difficulties understanding or finding an electric vehicle charger in San Miguel, and that these charging concerns reduce their willingness to actually rent an EV. And they also emphasized the need for strategically located fast chargers near hotels, tourism destinations, and public parking areas. And they also pointed out specific parishes and specific sites where we need charging based on the feedback that they get from visitors who rent cars. And rental fleets are really important to consider because they also influence the local EV market because after they turn over their fleet after about 4 or 5 years, then many residents later purchase secondhand vehicles from these rental companies. And so if rental car companies have a lot more electric vehicles, then residents can buy cheaper electric vehicles secondhand through these same companies. So supporting rental car companies will also support adoption locally. I also wanted to note the process of participatory mapping. And participatory mapping is a way for community members to share local knowledge and identify their needs directly onto a map. And survey tools like the one I use called ArcGIS Survey 123 allows users to actually drop points on a map and show, for example, where additional EV chargers are urgently needed. And in the future, this same type of tool that I used could be shared more broadly with residents and other stakeholder groups to understand their charging needs and actually turn their feedback into a layer of spatial data. So on the right was one of the survey questions that I had in my survey for a rental car company, which I had shown earlier, which is I asked them to mark on the map a location where you believe that EV chargers would be most useful for supporting the rideshare drivers in San Miguel. And I also had them explain a bit more about that in addition to this spatial data. And so this analysis is a dynamic and ongoing process that will continue to evolve alongside policy goals, user needs, and market conditions, and it requires continued collaboration with the regional government, municipalities, EDA, rental car companies, and other stakeholders. And there are definitely future collaboration opportunities between the university and the regional government. One thing that I noticed is that we don't have access to higher resolution EV adoption data. So, for example, we don't know how many electric vehicles there are in each municipality or in each parish. It's only available at the archipelago level. And so this is really important for us to be able to estimate demands and more accurately plan priorities for building chargers. And then another thing that we could further expand is additional municipalities like Lage do Pico could be explored as future case studies so we can compare different contexts and different priorities and see how the mapping tool might differ in these different municipalities. So the last step and objective of my project was moving from research to community action. So one of my objectives was to build long-term local capacity in the Azores to using mapping tools to solve environmental problems. And so I co-hosted GIS workshops with the university, research centers, the public library, and the vocational school. And in total, I trained 83 community participants across 7 different GIS workshops. And these participants included students, faculty, and also researchers. And then the last piece of my project is this documentary video project. So I believe that policy action requires collaboration across the entire community ecosystem, and science is meant to be shared with people and to be accessible. And so in that regard, I've been collaborating with local film production company Aerial World Visions, and we're creating a short documentary to educate the public on why electrification is important for the Azores. And so I also wanted to emphasize that this project is open and is ongoing. It's open to any feedback or opportunities for collaboration and any input or thoughts. So definitely, if you'd like to reach out, this is my contact information. I would love to get in contact with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Priya. Your research is very interesting. And one thing that I like so much, it's because it's a apply project. You think in the community and in the society and how it's could be useful for people. Then I would like to congratulate you for this very good research. Priya, I have the first question. What advice would you give to young research like yourself?
Mhm. I definitely, when I was in undergrad, I was really shy to reach out to my professors and ask them about the research that they were working on. But it's really important that you talk to people and ask them what their interests are and what the research is about, because you might find some overlap with your own interests. And so there could be a lot of opportunities out there if you just kind of get to know people and talk about what they're interested in. And then secondly, I would say definitely don't feel scared to apply for grant opportunities. I had applied to this Fulbright National Geographic grant only a few years after graduating from my bachelor's, and I didn't know if I had enough experience or if they would select me, but I ended up applying anyways because I had a really amazing mentor who encouraged me, and I ended up getting this really incredible opportunity. So definitely don't sell yourself short for these opportunities, and again, like ask ask people around you and talk about your interests, and maybe people will point out more opportunities to you as well. So it's really great to be open about your interests and those and seek out those types of grant opportunities.
Very good advice. Um, Other thing that I would like to know, what have been the biggest challenge you've faced in this research so far?
Mhm. For me, I was coming to a brand new place where I didn't really know anyone, and I didn't know how the different systems work over here. It's quite different from in the States. And so I think the first couple of months, I was really focused on getting settled and getting more information and meeting a lot of people. Because over here, I think building relationships is definitely a huge first step of doing the research, and getting access to the data and the tools that you need kind of comes as a second step after building those initial relationships. And so I think the difference in the kind of systems and ways things work and also the pace of things was at first a big adjustment for me, but eventually I kind of got more accustomed to it, and now I feel very at home. And now the time kind of flew very fast by because I'm leaving in a couple of days, and it seems like I just got here a week ago, even though it's been 8 months. So.
And Priya, what are the greatest potential application of GIS in the field of tourism?
Mhm.
Because you told about the Google Maps and
Definitely.
other thing that you said, but what are the greatest potential?
Mhm. So, when I was teaching my GIS workshops, I actually focused on mapping tourism pressure in the different parishes in São Miguel. And so, one application could be, of course, to monitor tourism pressure, monitor how local lodgement development is affecting residents, and also to distribute, visitor flows, manage destination hotspots, and also plan for future development and future destinations. And so I think in the context of San Miguel and in the Azores, definitely distributing some of that pressure and monitoring visitor flows and those types of things.
Okay, Priya, thank you so much. I'd like to wish a lot of luck in this research and also, of course, in your career. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniela, and thank you for having me.